In Bantu Beliefs and Magic, C.W. Hobley makes a very interesting statement regarding the religion of the Agikuyu people. He says that the Agikuyu people had this religion that was very similar to the Semitic religions of the Middle East. In fact, it says that their God was similar to Yahweh of the Bible. And of course, in the rest of the book, he gives us these verses that match very well with practices that the Akikuyu used to have in their religious practices and sacrifices and all that. Very interesting stuff. But it says that it turns out that while the Yahweh God was similar to Yahweh of the Bible, and we are talking of Ngai, of course, or Ngai, there was something interesting when it came to the understanding of this deity by the general person or the public. But let's read and see what he says. He says, it is moreover highly improbable that the ancient Semitic beliefs should have originated in East Africa. Now, here he's talking about where did those beliefs come from? We must therefore decide whether such similarity as we find today is merely a case of parallel and unconnected development, or the result of an ancient invention of Semitic race, or possibly of a race which had adopted the Semitic beliefs. So he says, these beliefs emerge in East Africa independent of the Middle East. In the present state of knowledge, it will be safer to assume that this similarity is due to the parallel development, many examples of which may be found in other parts of the world. He concludes that there is no interconnectivity, really, that these two belief systems emerge separately. That sounds very far-fetched, to be honest, and I think the person who wrote the introduction, Juan Frazier, disagrees with him on that. Then he continues, it is, however, necessary to make it clear that if there should have been any Semitic influence, it cannot have been derived from the Arab settlement on the east coast of Africa, founded during the last 100 years. So he says, while the Arabs, of course, also have those Semitic religious practices, of course, Islam is very close to the Judaism and those religions. But he says there is no way it's the Arabs who are responsible for spreading those beliefs into the people in hinterland, like the Agikuyu, for example. Their political hold of the country never extended much beyond the tidal waters, and their only social influence was a slight one exercised at intermittent intervals by the slave raiding or ivory trading expedition. So the Arabs did not really do a lot, and they were not here long enough to embed these beliefs in the people. No ancient trace of Mohammedanism can be found among the people under consideration, and their present stage of culture is pre-Islamic in point of time. Then he says this, the religious beliefs of the tribes of Kikuyu and Ukamba generally consist of a rudimentary conception of a high god, the corresponding more or less to the old Hebrew concept of Yahweh. To the bulk of the peasantry, this idea is naturally very vague and practically subconscious. So he says to the average person, that concept of the deity is vague generally. They know of it, but they don't have very clear understanding of what it or they used not to. But the elders of what may be termed as high place are believed to have clear conception of it. So he calls these elders of high place. They understood, which I'm going to interpret to be elders who've been initiated to the highest level of that society. They understood. Now, of course, the question remains, what is that really that they understood? Probably we'll never know for sure, because not long after this, or as he was writing this book, actually, there was huge transformation that was happening in East Africa. The Kikuyu were in the middle of that transformation. Of course, there was conversion to Christianity. There was the abandonment of the old ancient practices of initiation, and people were no longer getting initiated the proper way so that they can be given the knowledge. Maybe some did, but I think there was a break somewhere. So we'll never know for sure what was this idea or concept of the deity. How did it look? What was the knowledge that these people got to get so that they have a clear understanding? Of course, we are not going to take Hobley's words to be also accurate, because this is an outsider who came in and tried to gather some information. And he says he was initiated to get information that otherwise he could not have gotten. But again, I've read elsewhere where somebody else, Louis Leakey, attempted the same. And Louis Leakey wrote a very a book that is very well known about the topic of the religion and the organizations of the Kikuyu, and that is the Southern Kikuyu. But Leakey acknowledges that he was initiated, but up to some point, and then he was told you cannot go beyond here. So here, at least he acknowledges that there is knowledge that I did not get. C.W. Hobley does not acknowledge that. He writes a sieve after he was initiated the first time. He got every information that he got. But I think there is a place where, especially where he talks about the Itwika among the Kikuyu, this organization like that was the highest organ. I think he acknowledges to some extent that there are things that he could not get anybody who was going into those meetings to tell him. I think he admits to some extent we can give him that. Now, you can get this book on Amazon. There is a link in the comment section. You can go get yourself a copy. And then you can also get a copy from Nuria Bookshop. They have copies of this book if you are in Kenya, but if you are outside Kenya, maybe in the US, you can get it on Amazon. I'm going to provide the links. Those are my random thoughts.